Pick that up, sweetheart. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 42 minutes before Sarah Chen saved the life he wanted dead. Cedar Creek Medical's night shift hummed with fluorescent lights and the sharp bite of antiseptic, the ICU monitors beeping their steady rhythms like mechanical heartbeats refusing to quit. Sarah moved through rounds with the kind of precision that made heads turn and stay turned, the way she checked for lines, the way her hands positioned a patient's shoulder to prevent pressure injuries, the way she read a monitor strip without looking at the numbers twice. Muscle memory. 3 tours worth of it. She'd been hired at Cedar Creek exactly 7 days ago, and already the night shift nurses were comparing notes about the new girl who didn't gossip, didn't complain, and somehow made 12 patient rooms run like a deployed field hospital. She wasn't watching people. She was cataloging them. By day 3, Sarah had noticed the discrepancies. In room for 47, Marine General Marcus Webb's surgical report from his 0600 procedure listed a spinal fusion repair with 3 hours of anesthesia. The patient chart showed he'd never left his bed. In room 319, the billing codes indicated 2 separate orthopedic surgeries, but only 1 incision marked the patient's body. In room 356, a pharmacy notation showed pain medication dispensed at doses that didn't match the written orders. The pattern was mathematical. Precise. Beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful when you know exactly how they work. She documented everything. Not in an official report, she was a nurse, just a nurse, and there were protocols for these things that would take weeks and committees and administrative reviews that disappeared into institutional silence. Instead, Sarah photographed patient charts with her phone during her breaks, cross-referenced billing codes against surgical reports, and stored the evidence on a secure drive hidden inside a pair of worn combat boots from Bagram that sat in her hall locker at home. Leather cracked and faded from desert sun. Sole worn thin from patrol routes through Sanjin Valley. Heavier than they should be because the truth doesn't weigh much, but the responsibility for what you do with it does. The boots contained an encrypted drive with evidence of something much larger than billing fraud. Something that connected back to a Marine Corps ambush in 2019 that killed 4 soldiers, including the ones General Webb had commanded. The ones he'd promised to bring home safe. Sarah had been there. She'd extracted the survivors. She'd held pressure on wounds that wouldn't stop bleeding, whispered medic protocols in the dark, pulled 14 Marines through the kill zone before the helicopters came. And then Naval Intelligence had called her with a new assignment: go civilian, go quiet, go into Cedar Creek Medical and find out why the casualties kept happening in ambush patterns that were too perfect, too coordinated. Someone was selling information. Patrol routes. Convoy schedules. Casualty evacuation timings. Someone was trading Marine blood for money. General Marcus Webb had been transferred stateside 3 weeks ago with injuries that didn't align to the official after-action report. Spinal fracture, they said. Soft tissue trauma. Nothing that explained the way he flinched when anyone approached from his left side, the way his hands trembled when he thought no one was looking. PTSD patterns. Intel gathering. And Sarah Chen, Master Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, had been assigned to monitor him and find the leak. Her son David served under Webb. That detail had almost caused her to request a different placement. Almost. But handlers didn't give you options when they assigned you targets, and Sarah had learned a long time ago that the personal stakes were the ones that mattered most. She checked on Webb in room 447 during her 2,100 rounds. His vitals were stable, blood pressure 134/78, heart rate steady at 68, oxygen saturation 97% on room air. She adjusted his for line with the efficiency of someone who'd done this under fire, in vehicles moving too fast, with shrapnel still falling. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They'd trained her to not look like what she was, and he'd trained her not to say things out loud when the walls had ears. So instead she positioned his pillow at the angle that would prevent aspiration, checked his catheter for output, and moved on. Dr. Caldwell watched from the nurse's station, his eyes tracking her with the careful attention of a predator assessing prey that had wandered into his territory. He was tall, expensive-looking in the way that money makes men expensive, tailored coat, watch that cost more than Sarah's car, the kind of grooming that came from generational wealth and zero accountability. He'd been working at Cedar Creek for 14 years, though the rumor said he'd transferred from Seattle after something had come up that nobody wanted to discuss. He held court at the station with the senior residents and attending physicians like he owned their oxygen, and nobody questioned his surgical reports because doctors didn't question other doctors, especially not wealthy ones. Sarah had questions. Very specific ones. About the $43,000 in unauthorized charges billed to Medicare under his name in the last 6 months. About the pharmaceutical rep that visited his office twice weekly, leaving with manila envelopes. About the fact that his patient satisfaction scores were perfect, impossibly perfect, while his mortality rates were 3% higher than the hospital average. He made his move at 18:47 hours in the cafeteria. Sarah was standing at the coffee station with a tray holding her meal, turkey sandwich, apple, water, the kind of food that tasted like cardboard but kept you functional for 14 hours. Dr. Caldwell arrived beside her with 4 other physicians, loud enough that the entire cafeteria could hear his announcement, "You know what? I'm placing a bet. $50 says the new girl quits by Friday. She doesn't have it. You can see it in her eyes, no steal. She'll break by end of week." The other doctors laughed. The sound was like knuckles cracking. Sarah poured her coffee without changing her expression. Caldwell waited exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned, shoulder-checking her with the kind of force that came from both intention and surprise. Her body was smaller than his, easier to move, and he was betting on her startling response, on her arm jerking and the tray flying and the humiliation of watching someone in scrubs pick food off the floor in front of an entire room of physicians. The tray did fly. Turkey sandwich arced through the air. Apple bounced twice. Water spilled across the tile floor in a pattern that looked almost random until you studied it, and then you could see the physics, the angle of impact, the trajectory of someone who'd calculated exactly how hard to hit and expected exactly this result. Sarah's hands moved before her brain caught up. Muscle memory. She didn't flinch. Didn't stumble. Her body absorbed the impact with the kind of economy of motion that came from years of not falling in high-G environments, in transport helicopters during rough weather, in vehicles taking rounds from weapons she wasn't supposed to be in range of. She turned, bent, and began picking up the scattered food with steady hands, her jaw set like stone, her expression blank enough that her face looked like it had been carved from something harder than flesh. "My apologies, doctor," she said quietly, her voice deferential and soft, designed to sound like someone without options. "I'll clean this up immediately." Caldwell smiled. The kind of smile that apex predators use when they've successfully bullied prey into submission. "See? No backbone. 3 days. You'll see." The cafeteria went back to its conversation. Nobody helped her. That was the point. Caldwell left before she finished, and the other physicians drifted away like they'd been watching someone else's misfortune instead of participating in it. Sarah scraped the spilled water and food into a trash bin, returned to the kitchen, got another sandwich, and clocked back into the ICU at 19:03 hours with 7 hours and 57 minutes left on her shift. But the real nightmare happened later, in the supply closet during her 2300 break. The closet was small, barely 8 feet square, lined with 4 bags and sterile dressing packs and boxes of gloves stacked like ammunition. Sarah pushed the door shut behind her and stood in the fluorescent glow, hands gripping the edge of the sink. Her knuckles turned white. The tremor that she kept hidden in public, that lived in her shoulders and her jaw and the space behind her ribs, surfaced here where nobody could see it. Not from fear. From restraint. From the exact moment where she was deciding whether to submit to what Caldwell wanted or burn the entire operation by walking into his office and showing him exactly who she was. She stared at her reflection in the metal surface above the sink. Face weathered from sun exposure that still hadn't faded after 8 months stateside. Eyes the color of burnt steel. Scar across her left temple from the shrapnel in Fallujah. Hands that had held lives together in places where the walls came down and kept coming down until there was nothing left but the people inside them and how badly they wanted to keep breathing. Master Chief Petty Officer. 3 tours. 2 purple hearts. 7 years of ops that nobody would ever declassify. And right now, in this supply closet, she was picking food off a floor while a doctor made bets about breaking her in less than a week. The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous rhythm. The ventilator in room 452 wheezed its mechanical song 3 walls over. Sarah gripped the sink tighter until she could feel the metal bite into her palms, until the pressure became something she could control, and then she stood up, washed her hands, and walked back to the ICU. General Webb was asleep when she checked on him at 23:47. His monitors showed good vitals, steady rhythm, the kind of recovery trajectory that suggested he'd make it. She adjusted his blanket, careful not to disturb the trauma line in his left forearm, and stepped back to observe him in the darkness of the dimmed room. Her son was depending on this man. Depending on him coming home. Depending on the woman who'd extracted him from that kill zone, understanding what they'd both sacrificed to get there. The night stretched ahead. 7 hours. 42 minutes until the morning shift arrived and she could go home to those combat boots, to the encrypted drive, to the growing file of evidence that Dr. Caldwell had no idea she was building. He thought he'd broken her. He thought the bet was real. He thought she was just a nurse without steel, without options, without the kind of lethal composure that only comes from having already survived the worst thing you could imagine. He had no idea what was walking toward him in the darkness. The nurse's station at Cedar Creek Medical smelled like burnt coffee and antiseptic wipe solution when Dr. Caldwell arrived at 0630, his voice carrying across the counter like a tank idling in a garage. Sarah was updating Webb's chart, blood pressure holding at 118/74, O2 sat 96%, pupils equal and reactive, when Caldwell leaned back against the counter, speaking loud enough for the entire night shift to turn and listen. "Chen, right? You know what your problem is? You think being thorough makes you smart. It makes you slow." He didn't wait for a response. He never did. Instead, he tossed a stack of patient charts at her feet. They scattered across the tile like playing cards. "Pick that up, sweetheart. That's more your speed." Sarah's jaw clenched once. A muscle jumped in her cheek, the only tell she'd allowed herself. Her hands remained perfectly steady as she bent, gathering each chart in sequence, organizing them by patient room number without rushing, without frustration visible in her movements. She stood, the file edges perfectly aligned against her scrub pocket, and met Caldwell's eyes for exactly 2 seconds. No expression. No acknowledgement. No sign that he'd said anything at all. Then she turned and continued her rounds to room 412, where a post-op thoracic patient was due for vitals. The other nurses looked away. One of them, Melissa from the evening shift, still charting, sucked air through her teeth and shook her head, but didn't speak. Nobody did. Caldwell watched her walk, his face darkening slightly. This wasn't the reaction he'd engineered. Humiliation was supposed to produce tears or anger, something visible, something he could point to and say *C, unstable, not a team player star. Instead, Sarah Chen had absorbed his contempt like a shock absorber and walked away cleaner than when she arrived. He made a mental note, escalate. At 13:20, in the hospital cafeteria, Sarah carried her lunch tray past Caldwell's table where he sat with 3 other physicians and a hospital administrator. The crowd was predictable, 20 staff members scattered across tables, enough witnesses to amplify whatever came next. Sarah had already calculated the vector 3 steps earlier, identifying the optimal path to her preferred corner seat where she could eat alone and continue reviewing the billing discrepancies she'd discovered in Caldwell's surgical authorizations. She documented every one. Charges for procedures not listed in operative reports. Billing codes that didn't match the diagnoses. A pattern of financial manipulation so precise it suggested either institutional approval or brilliant, reckless greed. Caldwell timed his movement perfectly. He stood just as she passed, his shoulder ramming into hers with deliberate precision. The collision was surgical in its brutality, designed to look accidental while leaving no doubt about intent. Sarah's tray clattered to the floor. Soup spread across tile like blood. Salad leaves scattered. A plastic cup skittered 3 feet before stopping against someone's shoe. The room went dead silent. 50 eyes fixed on the mess, then on Sarah, waiting to see if she'd shatter. "Oh, sorry," Caldwell said, voice dripping false concern as he looked down at her. "Guess you're as clumsy as you are slow." Laughter erupted from his table. High-pitched, rehearsed, the kind of laughter designed to humiliate rather than amuse. The hospital administrator smiled, a thin, complicit expression that suggested she'd known what was coming. Sarah stared at the mess for 3 seconds. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't take a breath to steady herself, didn't clench her fists, didn't allow her face to register anything at all. Instead, she kneeled, picking up every piece methodically, the bowl, the cup, the scattered vegetables, the plastic utensils. She wiped the floor with napkins, moving with the precision of someone who'd been trained in far worse circumstances, and stood. She deposited the debris in the trash bin and walked out of the cafeteria without eating. Without speaking. Without acknowledging that anyone in that room existed. But that wasn't the worst part. At 18:45, in the ICU hallway outside room 304, Caldwell made his move. Sarah was updating the medication log for General Webb's evening antibiotics, ceftriaxone 2 grams for Q12H, scheduled for 18:30, administered at 18:36. 6 minutes late due to a code consult 2 rooms down. It was a minor variance, medically irrelevant, and documented in the chart. Caldwell threw Webb's patient file at her feet anyway, hard enough that the pages exploded across the linoleum. 2 residents and 4 nurses witnessed it. "You missed the medication time by 6 minutes. 6? What kind of nurse can't tell time?" Sarah's knuckles went white around her clipboard. Her face remained a mask, the kind of absolute composure that only comes from having already survived worse. She bent, gathered the scattered pages, tapped them against her thigh to align them, and continued toward Webb's room. She didn't speak. She didn't defend herself. She didn't acknowledge the humiliation spreading through the hallway like a contamination alert. It took 42 minutes for her 15-minute break to arrive. Sarah locked herself in the supply closet on the 3rd floor, the one nobody used anymore since the new supply distribution system had moved most inventory to the basement. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed with an insect-like persistence. She gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles went bone-white, staring at her reflection in the tiny mirror above the faucet. Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen stared back, or what was left of her, at least. The version that had been reduced to sweetheart and told she was slow and clumsy and incompetent. The version that had to absorb contempt without response because breaking cover meant Webb died, the evidence died, and 4 Marines who'd already been sacrificed would stay sacrificed. She released the sink and returned to the floor with her face empty again, her scrubs fresh, her composure restored. When she clocked out at 0700, Caldwell's 3-day quit bet had already failed. Sarah had worked 11 shifts. She wasn't going anywhere. By the end of that first week, the pattern had solidified into something almost predictable. Caldwell would initiate a social attack, a snide comment about her documentation, a dismissive gesture, a carefully timed shoulder check in a crowded corridor. Sarah would absorb it with the composure of someone who'd stared down worse, and continue her work. The other nurses began to notice something unusual. The more Caldwell attacked, the more meticulously Sarah documented everything. Not defensively, comprehensively. Charts with timestamps. Medication logs with notation. Billing codes cross-referenced against surgical procedures. She'd begun cataloging the pattern of Caldwell's manipulations through the lens of financial fraud. An appendectomy billed as an emergency abdominal exploration. A routine colonoscopy documented as a diagnostic gastroenterology consultation with double coding. A straightforward sprain billed under orthopedic surgical intervention. The pattern wasn't random. It was systematic. Someone knew exactly how far they could push the billing codes without triggering automated audits. Someone had studied the hospital's financial oversight the way a safecracker studies locks. Meanwhile, General Webb remained in room 304, stable but declining. His chart read like a story in medical notation: BP trending down, O2 requirements increasing, kidney function beginning to show stress. The injuries from Bagram had complications that didn't match the official after-action reports. Shrapnel distribution patterns inconsistent with the stated IED location. Entry wound suggesting the explosives had detonated closer than the reports indicated. Someone had gotten the Marines' patrol routes. Someone had positioned that IED with precision. Someone had collected a paycheck for information. Sarah documented Webb's decline in the same meticulous way she documented Caldwell's fraud. Vital signs every 4 hours. Medication responses. Lab values trending. Pain assessments using the proper scale. Everything by protocol, everything by the book, everything pristine. The other nurses began to understand that Sarah Chen wasn't slow or clumsy. She was thorough in a way that suggested she'd been trained for observation at a level that went beyond nursing school. She noticed things. She documented things. She remembered things. On the 7th day, during her lunch break in the break room, Caldwell watched her from the doorway. She was eating a sandwich, turkey on whole wheat, a single apple, reading something on her personal phone that she quickly minimized when she sensed his presence. His jaw tightened. She'd absorbed a full week of his campaign without cracking. The other nurses still worked around her, still avoided getting involved, but something had shifted. They were no longer laughing at his jokes. They were no longer joining in when he made dismissive comments. They were watching Sarah work with a new kind of respect, the quiet kind that recognized competence and endurance. Caldwell understood something in that moment. He'd miscalculated. Sarah Chen wasn't just a nurse. She was something else entirely. Someone trained to absorb punishment. Someone capable of maintaining perfect composure under sustained psychological pressure. Someone who documented everything with precision that suggested she was building a case. He left the break room and walked toward the administrative offices. If social attacks wouldn't break her, he needed to move to the next stage. He needed to make calls. He needed to weaponize his institutional authority before this woman got close enough to discover what he'd been doing with those billing codes, and more importantly, before she uncovered the reason those codes existed in the first place. The brother-in-law who'd made him rich. The defense contractor who'd been selling military intelligence about patrol route schedules. The kickback scheme that had started small and grown into something that required silencing certain people. People like General Marcus Webb, whose injuries had come from an IED placed with insider knowledge. Webb had started asking questions about the timing of the attack, about why they'd changed routes at the last second, about which staff officer had made that decision. Caldwell picked up his phone. He had 3 board members on speed dial. He had references to fabricate. He had state investigators he could call if needed. Sarah Chen was about to learn what happened when you looked too closely at things that weren't meant to be found. But that was still 3 acts away. For now, she was just the night shift nurse who'd survived her first week without breaking. The one who documented everything. The one who watched Webb's vital signs like she was guarding something precious. The one who'd absorbed every humiliation and walked away with her composure intact. The quiet ones always do. The monitor's piercing wail split the night at 0247. One continuous scream. No rhythm. Just flat line. Sarah's eyes snapped up from the charting station. General Marcus Webb's room. The light above his door blazed red, code activation. She moved before thought caught up, her body remembering protocols older than her credentials, muscle memory from field tents and blood-soaked concrete. 3 strides to his bedside. Motionless. Pupils fixed. The ventilator still wheezed its mechanical breath into a chest that had stopped responding. She checked the monitor herself. Nothing. The kind of nothing that meant she had maybe 4 minutes before the brain started dying. Code blue, ICU 4. Code blue, ICU 4. Her voice steady as she initiated chest compressions, hands positioned directly over his sternum, muscle memory taking over, the exact angle, the exact depth, the rhythm that kept blood moving when the heart refused. Get me a crash cart. EKG leads off. Someone call cardiology. Now. The night shift exploded into motion around her. The crash cart arrived in 17 seconds, she counted. Defibrillator pads on Webb's chest. No shock advised. Asystole. The flatline that meant they'd have to do this the hard way, manually, pushing a dead man's circulation until his heart remembered how to beat or until they couldn't push anymore. Starting compressions. 2 minutes on, 2 minutes rotating, Sarah called out, her hands pumping in steady rhythm. 100 compressions per minute. The soundtrack of resuscitation, the hiss of the ambu bag, the pneumatic hiss of the defibrillator charging and cycling, the squeak of shoes on tile as the respiratory tech positioned at Webb's head, already intubating, securing the airway for the long fight ahead. For doctors arrived within 5 minutes. The initial code team. Dr. Morrison leading, his voice clipped and professional as he ordered epinephrine, atropine, pushing for medications that theoretically might restart a stubborn heart. They rotated compressions every 2 minutes. Muscle fatigue was the enemy, consistency more important than strength. Sarah stepped back, watched Morrison take her place on the chest, his rhythm slightly shallower, less practiced. She waited for him to lose it, to rush, to break form. He didn't. He was competent. Thorough. But at 0255, after 8 minutes of continuous resuscitation with zero response, Morrison finally stepped back and looked at the monitor. Still asystole, he said to the room. To everyone. To no one. Anybody want to call this? No one spoke. Morrison waited another 30 seconds. The ventilator wheezed. The 4-pump clicked. Someone's pager buzzed somewhere down the hall. The hospital kept living around them, other patients in other rooms, other crises, the endless machinery of a place that never stopped running. Time of death, 0247, Morrison said quietly. Mark it. But that wasn't the worst part. Sarah looked at the clock, now reading 0256, and felt something cold settle in her chest. They weren't done. The protocol said 10 to 15 minutes of resuscitation before calling it, and they'd stopped at 8. She'd worked with crews who pushed for 20. She performed open cardiac massage on the deck of a Navy hospital ship after 40 minutes of flat resuscitation and watched the patient wake up 3 days later asking for coffee. She didn't speak. She didn't question. She simply made a note of Morrison's decision and watched him leave the ICU. But Dr. Caldwell had been standing in the hallway the entire time. She'd seen him through the window. Phone to his ear. Eyes tracking her every movement. The next 4 hours unfurled like a coordinated operation. At 0310, 3 cardiologists arrived to review the case, a second opinion, protocol called for it, because General Marcus Webb was a federal patient with a certain level of scrutiny. Sarah watched through the window as they reviewed his EKG, his imaging from Bagram, the surgical notes that didn't quite match his injuries. They stood in a cluster, speaking in low voices. Head shaking. By 0330, they'd written their assessment in the chart, severe myocardial infarction with extensive anterior wall involvement. Irreversible damage. Further intervention not recommended. Prognosis futile. Futile. The word that meant stop trying. At 0420, 2 surgeons came down from the call room. They looked at Webb's chest X-ray, at the catheterization report that showed coronary vessels that looked like they'd been through a war. Because they had. Bagram had a way of breaking things that didn't show up on the official after-action reports. Sarah had learned that from the boots in her locker, the one she'd retrieved from Webb's footlocker when they'd first brought him in, the one she'd hidden because she knew what they contained and where they'd lead if Caldwell found them. The surgeons left after 12 minutes of silent assessment. Too unstable for the OR, Dr. Hayes told her flatly. Even if we tried. Which we're not. At 0550, 3 hospital administrators appeared. Not doctors. The money people. The ones who signed the liability waivers and counted bed costs and calculated the difference between a patient who might survive and a patient who'd become a legal problem. Sarah heard them in the hallway outside Webb's room, their voices carrying the particular cadence of people discussing a decision that had already been made. General Webb's condition is not compatible with recovery, one of them said. Organ failure is imminent. Life support continuation will cost approximately $8,400 per day without prospect of meaningful recovery. The family has been notified. We recommend withdrawal of mechanical ventilation at 0800 hours. That gave Sarah exactly 2 hours and 10 minutes. Caldwell stood in the hallway like a spider monitoring its web, phone pressed to his ear again. She counted, that was his 5th call since the code. Each time he'd position himself where she could see him. Each time he'd wait until she was looking before he turned away, as if he wanted her to know he was making moves. As if he wanted her to understand that she'd already lost. She pulled Webb's chart. The disconnect between the official Bagram report and his actual injuries was glaring now that she looked at it without pretense. A Marine general didn't sustain acute myocardial damage from an IED, not unless something else had happened. Something that got buried in the redacted sections of the casualty report. Something that got 4 of her son's squad killed and somehow got tied directly to the defense contractor who'd made his fortune selling patrol schedules to the enemy. It all started with knowing where Marines would be. It all ended if Webb died without talking. At 0805, she watched the respiratory tech enter Webb's room with the withdrawal protocol in his hands. The official form. The one that meant removing the tube, stopping the medications, letting the body finish what the disease had started. The respiratory tech was young, maybe 24, with the exhausted eyes of someone who'd done this 100 times and never got used to it. Caldwell stepped beside Sarah at the nurse's station. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp, like a knife made of money. "Nurse Chen," he said, his voice quiet enough that only she could hear, "You're being reassigned. Effective immediately. Dr. Stevens will assume General Webb's care." Sarah didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the monitor as Webb's oxygen saturation began to drop. 94, 91. 87. His vital signs suggest she started. "You're reassigned." Caldwell's jaw tightened. Almost imperceptibly. The tiny fracture in his composure that meant he was feeling pressure. "To pediatrics. Effective now. Leave the floor." "Doctor, with respect, the general's condition is not." "That was an order, Nurse Chen." His voice hardened. "Not a discussion. You have 2 minutes to clock out or I'm calling security to escort you." She watched the monitor. 83 now. 79, the downward slope of a patient in arrest. The respiratory tech had one hand on the ventilator dial, ready to disconnect on Caldwell's command, ready to begin the official process of letting Marcus Webb die. Sarah stood. Slowly. Deliberately. She'd spent 17 years in the military learning how to follow orders that made no sense. How to accept dismissal. How to bend under pressure without breaking. She'd been trained to endure humiliation, accept authority, stand down when outranked. But she'd also been trained to recognize an ambush. And this was an ambush. Caldwell timing her removal perfectly with the withdrawal order. Caldwell making sure she couldn't intervene, couldn't provide testimony, couldn't be present when Webb's condition deteriorated. Caldwell erasing the only person in this hospital who understood what was actually at stake. She looked at the clock. 0818. She looked at Webb's oxygen saturation. 71 now. 68, the numbers dropping like an elevator with a cut cable. She looked at Caldwell, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Cedar Creek Medical, the mask didn't quite fit. Her hands went steady in a different way. Her voice dropped half an octave. The one she'd learned in the field when giving orders to people who needed them to survive. "I need you to step away from the monitor." Caldwell's face went blank. That's when Sarah understood he'd never heard her voice like that. The nurse voice. The deferential voice. The apologetic voice. All gone. What happened next changed everything. At 0820, Sarah Chen walks into General Webb's room like she owns it. The respiratory tech is standing over the ventilator, adjusting settings. He doesn't look up. Sarah moves past him without slowing. Step aside. Not a question. Not polite. The tech turns, confused. The doctor said, Sarah is already at the crash cart, fingers moving through instruments with the precision of someone who's done this in darkness, in dust, in places maps don't show. She finds the scalpel. Pulls it out. The blade catches the overhead light like a silver eye. Everyone out. Now. Her voice has changed. It's not the deferential nurse anymore. It's something older, harder, forged in a different kind of fire. The respiratory tech's face goes pale. What are you? Sarah cuts through Webb's gown in one deliberate motion. Places the scalpel against his sternum. Out or stay, but don't interfere. The tech runs. Probably calling for help. Sarah doesn't care. Time is a ticking clock now, 5 minutes until security arrives, maybe less. Her hands move on their own. Muscle memory takes over. The scalpel finds the natural line between his ribs. She cuts. The chest opens with a sound like fabric tearing. Blood wells up, dark and thick. She's done this before. Kandahar, 2011. Bagram, 2014. In places that don't exist in official records. Places where you don't wait for surgeons. You become the surgeon. Her hands enter Webb's chest cavity. Cold. The body has already begun to cool. She finds his heart, a slack, useless weight against her palms. She begins direct cardiac massage, squeezing the ventricles together, releasing, squeezing again. 30 compressions per minute. Her lips move, whispering protocols she learned as a Navy combat medic in San Diego, refined in the Hindu Kush, squeeze ventricles together, release, both chambers, 30 per minute, support the septum. The monitor still shows flat line. She works Webb's heart like clay, forcing blood through chambers that forgot how to move. Sweat runs down her temples. Her breath comes steady and measured. Not panicked. Never panicked. At 0823, boots thunder down the hallway. Dr. Caldwell pushes through the doorway with security behind him, his face a shade of purple that should require medical intervention. What the hell are you doing? His voice cracks like breaking glass. Sarah doesn't look up. Doesn't stop pumping. 17 minutes. That's what she has. 17 minutes until cardiac brain death becomes irreversible, until the neurons die and whatever remains of Marine General Marcus Webb becomes a corpse wearing a uniform. Caldwell moves toward her. The first security guard grabs his arm. Sir, she's performing a procedure, she's criminally insane. Caldwell spit flies. Sarah's hands keep moving. 1, 2, 3. Squeeze. Release. Her forearms burn like they're filled with broken glass. The monitor still flatlines. Webb's heart is a corpse in her hands. At 0831, she feels the change. Not relief. Not hope. Just data. Pain is information. The heart shifts under her palms. Resistance changes. At 0835, a flutter. Barely perceptible. Her hands freeze for 1/10 of a second, then resume. At 0837, the monitor spikes. A beat. Then another. Sinus rhythm. The heart that died in her hands remembers how to live. Weak, irregular, but present. Webb's oxygen saturation climbs. 68, 72. 79, the monitor begins its steady beeping, a sound like mechanical resurrection. Sarah withdraws her hands. Steps back. Her palms are covered in blood. Her scrubs are soaked. Security moves in at 0839. 2 officers, hands already reaching for her. She doesn't resist. Doesn't run. Doesn't even ask why. She extends her wrists. The handcuffs click like a door closing. Cold metal against her skin. They're pulling her toward the hallway now, and she lets them. Behind her, the ventilator resumes its rhythm. Webb's chest tubes are drawing, the system designed to re-expand collapsed lungs, the machinery of medicine that works when human hands are no longer needed. She doesn't look back. Dr. Caldwell stands in the hallway with his phone already out. His fingers move across the screen like a pianist. Sarah hears fragments as security escorts her toward the stairwell, 3 board members, practicing beyond scope, state medical investigators filing charges. His voice rises. I don't care if she saved his life. She's criminally unlicensed and she'll spend time for it. Sarah's jaw sets. The composure holds. Mask still intact. Security doesn't see her hands flex inside the handcuffs. Doesn't see the trembling that isn't fear, it's restraint. The ability to remain still when every nerve screams to move, to fight, to do something other than walk quietly down a stairwell in handcuffs toward the end of everything she's built. The parking garage is half empty at 1015. Her car sits in space 47, a silver Honda Civic that's just forgettable enough to be invisible. Security unlocks the handcuffs at the driver's side door. One officer hands her a manila envelope. Your personal effects. You're suspended pending investigation. Don't return to the hospital. She takes the envelope without speaking. Her badge is inside. Her locker key. They leave her there. The footsteps echo across concrete, growing fainter. She sits in the driver's seat. Closes the door. The garage smells like motor oil and concrete dust and something metallic that might be her own blood transferred from her hands to the steering wheel. Her phone is dead. Not broken, just drained. Naval Intelligence won't answer anyway. Can't risk the exposure. She knows this. Has known it since Caldwell made his first phone call. 3 board members means the hospital's legal team is involved. State medical investigators means they're pulling her personnel file, her references, her credentials. Everything fabricated. Everything that kept her operational for 6 months. Everything that got her close enough to recover the evidence. The combat boots are in her hall locker. Size 9, worn leather, laced with paracord, the pair she carried out of Bagram in 2014. Inside the left boot, sewn into the heel lining, the encrypted drive. Radio intercepts. Payment records. Contractor billing dates that match Marine Patrol schedules. Proof that someone inside Cedar Creek Medical has been selling information to the enemy. Proof that 4 Marines in David's unit died because someone made a $847,000 consulting deal with a defense contractor named Marcus Whelan. Proof that's now locked behind a door she no longer has access to. Her forehead drops against the steering wheel. The leather is cold. The steering wheel is cold. Everything is cold except the fire inside her chest that she's trained for 18 years to contain. Master Chief Petty Officers don't break. Don't cry. Don't allow themselves the luxury of despair. But she just watched the mission dissolve in 6 hours. 12 doctors walking away. 1 woman performing a procedure that shouldn't be possible and changing nothing except her own future. The evidence is 3 floors away. The handcuffs are gone but the cage is still there. Caldwell is upstairs on his phone, already calling in favors. Whelan is somewhere outside Portland, already moving money to accounts she can't trace. And the man whose life she just saved with her bare hands will wake up to find his testimony incomplete, his evidence inaccessible, his mission unfinished. She doesn't know that David left school at 10:45. Doesn't know he broke into their home safe. Doesn't know that in 90 minutes, a 17-year-old boy will walk through conference room doors on the 3rd floor carrying a shadow box that will change the meaning of everything that just happened in this parking garage. She only knows that the engine is cold and dead as her phone, and she cannot make herself move. The conference room on Cedar Creek Medical's administrative floor sat perfectly quiet at 1,400 hours, the kind of silence that lives in rooms where careers end. The long table reflected the fluorescent lights like still water. 7 board members occupied 7 chairs. The hospital's legal counsel sat at the head, a folder labeled Chen, Sarah, an authorized medical intervention positioned in front of him like a gavel. Dr. Caldwell stood near the window, his posture confident, his phone already in his jacket pocket where he'd received 3 text confirmations that the state investigators were reviewing Sarah's inconsistent references. He'd made his calls an hour before. The board members knew her background didn't add up. The investigators were already building their case. By sunset, she'd be arrested. The legal counsel was explaining the liability exposure when the conference room doors burst open. A 17-year-old boy pushed through, his uniform pressed sharp, Naval Academy prep school colors. David Chen. His mother's eyes in a teenage face, his mother's jawline, his mother's posture of someone carrying weight nobody else could see. In his hands, pressed against his chest like a scripture, was a shadow box. The kind that belonged to walls. The kind that belonged to mothers who'd given everything to an oath. "Mom, they need to see these," David said. His voice cracked on the second word. The board members exchanged glances. The legal counsel's hand froze mid-sentence. David opened the shadow box. 3 medals caught the fluorescent light. Bronze Star first, its ribbon catching the edge of the overhead panels. Then Silver Star, the metal face catching light like a small sun. Then 2 ribbons, purple and gold, 2 purple hearts arranged side by side like parentheses around tragedy. And in the center, on its own mounting, a ribbon of pale blue and white with a 5-point star at the clasp. A Navy Cross. The room did something electrical. The legal counsel sat backward in his chair. 1 board member stood. Another's mouth opened, closed, opened again. From the back of the room, near the security station's interior access door, a man in a security uniform stepped forward. 70 years old maybe older, his uniform pressed with military precision though nothing about him belonged to any hospital. His name was Martinez. His hands were shaking. "That's a Navy Cross," he said. His voice cracked like old leather. "That's a Navy Cross. Master Chief, I served under you in Kandahar. 3rd Battalion, 55th Marines, Dark Horse Company. August 2009. That was you." He came forward like a man approaching an altar. "That was you. You pulled us through Jolin District. 7 of us came out. We shouldn't have come out. We came out because of you." The door opened again. A stretcher. 2 orderlies pushing because the man on it insisted, despite the chest tube still running into his body, despite the fact that no surgeon would have cleared him for movement. Marine General Marcus Webb, his hospital gown replaced with a dress uniform tunic pulled over the bandages, his medals already positioned on his chest because some things mattered more than infection control. He looked at the shadow box. He looked at David. He looked at the legal counsel, then at Caldwell near the window. "I want to speak," Webb said. His voice came from somewhere deeper than his body. "I want to tell you who saved my life at 0820 this morning and then tell you what she's actually been doing here." The legal counsel opened his mouth. Webb's hand rose. Not aggressive. A command. It wasn't a request. It was a Marine giving an order to people who'd never taken one before. Master Chief Sarah Chen deployed 3 times. Afghanistan twice, Iraq once. She was a field medicine instructor for 3rd Battalion. She's the one who pulled 7 Marines through a kill zone in Bagram in 2009. The ambush that took 4 of our people. Webb's eyes found David. For Marines who didn't come home. One of them was your mother's brother. Your uncle. David, she was there when her brother died. The room held its breath like water. And then, Webb continued, his voice steady as surgical steel, and then she stayed quiet about how it happened. Because the intelligence breach that killed those Marines came from someone selling patrol routes in advance. Someone making money on our positions. Someone who knew where we would be because someone was paid to tell them. Webb looked directly at Caldwell. She's been here 6 months finding out who. Caldwell's face changed. Not red. Worse. The blood drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. Her classified assignment, Webb said, involved me. My injuries didn't make sense because they shouldn't have. I was hit outside my battalion's normal patrol corridor. Because someone gave the enemy advanced intelligence and I was collateral to a larger target. I nearly died because someone wanted me dead before I could start asking why my unit was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Webb gestured to the shadow box. That Navy cross is for the Bagram extraction. Those purple hearts are for injuries she took bringing people home. She saved my life twice now, once in 2009 in a kill zone, and once this morning in an ICU when 12 doctors had already told her to stop. And every time she could have talked about any of this, every time she could have told you who she was or what she was doing, she worked. She stayed quiet. She documented evidence. She kept you all safe by not saying a single word. The legal counsel stood. Slowly. Like rising from deep water. What are you saying, General? I'm saying, Webb replied, that you need to stop investigating Master Chief Chen and start investigating Dr. Caldwell's brother-in-law. Marcus Whelan. Defense contracting. Look at when Whelan's company got paid for consulting services. Then look at when Marines got hit outside patrol corridors. Match the dates. You'll find the pattern. You'll find that someone was selling route information for profit, and when Master Chief Chen nearly figured it out, someone tried to destroy her career to stop it from coming to light. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then the state investigator nearest the door picked up his phone. By 1445, they had Caldwell's financial records. By 1520, they'd found the first discrepancy, surgical billing for procedures that never happened, matched against Marcus Whelan's consulting invoices on the same dates. The money moved in circles like water going down a drain, contractor payments to a consulting LLC that Caldwell owned, then reimbursements for phantom surgeries, the hospital insurance covering costs that went directly into Caldwell's personal accounts. Each payment timed perfectly with military casualties. Each routing date matching patrol schedule breaches by 48 hours or less. The hospital legal counsel began cross-referencing patient charts against the billing discrepancies. The inconsistencies Sarah had been quietly documenting her entire first week, the charts that didn't match surgical reports, the procedures that had never been performed, the patterns that had seemed random until you saw them arranged in sequence. 12 cases of billing fraud. 18 falsified surgical reports. The entire operation laid bare because one person had noticed irregularities that nobody else was paying attention to notice. By 1610, the state investigators contacted Naval Intelligence. By 1635, they opened the encrypted drive they retrieved from Sarah's locker, the combat boots, the worn ones from Bagram that had sat undisturbed for 6 months, waiting for the moment someone would finally be cleared to open them. Radio intercepts. Enemy forces with advanced knowledge of patrol routes. Payment records linking Marcus Whelan's contracting firm to offshore accounts. Patrol schedules that matched contractor billing dates within 48 hours. For Marines dead. A general's near-fatal injuries. All of it connected to someone making money on their blood. By 1700, the FBI was contacted. Federal charges were filed. Fraud. Conspiracy. Depending on how deeply the military investigation could prove knowledge of the security breach, potentially treason-adjacent charges for accepting financial benefit from actions that resulted in American deaths. Caldwell sat in the conference room for 45 minutes while his network crumbled. The board members he'd called for favors now avoided his eyes. The outside investigators he'd brought in to destroy Sarah now built a case against him instead. His own weapon, the nuclear option he'd deployed to end her career, had exposed everything he'd constructed. At 1700, hospital security escorted him out. His credentials suspended. His brother-in-law's phone ringing constantly, panic in every call, lawyers already being hired. Sarah Chen sat in her car in the parking garage, the same spot where she'd been sitting since 0820 when security had dragged her out in handcuffs. The engine was off. Her phone was dead. She couldn't make herself turn the key. Then her phone rang. She'd plugged it in. She didn't remember doing it, but it was alive again, and the number calling was a number she hadn't seen in 6 months. Naval Intelligence. Her commanding officer's voice came through the speaker like morning light breaking water. Master Chief, you're reinstated. Mission successful. Return to base for full debrief. Your son David has authorization to join you. Your Navy Cross is being awarded at the Pentagon ceremony, but that's administrative. You did the work. Come home. She started the car for the first time since morning. The engine caught. The radio came to life. Static, then music, then nothing but the sound of 4 cylinders turning over and her hand steady on the wheel. 2 months later, Sarah Chen walked past the community college's adult education wing on the 3rd floor of the Portland Center for Medical Training. Room 314. Through the window she could see Dr. Caldwell demonstrating chest compressions on a plastic dummy. 18 students. Most of them probably working retail, probably trying to get certified for hospital cleaning jobs, probably had no idea that the man in front of them used to run surgical units, used to have power, used to believe his network was unbreakable. He taught CPR for minimum wage now. The only medical work left after his license suspension, after his brother-in-law's federal indictment, after his own plea deal that avoided prison by cooperating against the contractor network. He looked up, saw her watching through the glass. Their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. She didn't smile. Didn't acknowledge him beyond that moment of recognition. Then she continued upstairs. The Naval Intelligence debrief took 90 minutes. For Marines avenged. 17 arrests across the contractor-to-enemy intelligence pipeline. General Webb's testimony, combined with the encrypted drive, had broken the network wide open. David sat beside her, understanding now, his Naval Academy appointment confirmed, his mother's rank finally acknowledged in the records he could see. Webb was there too, recovered enough to return to limited duty, recommending Master Chief Chen for her next assignment. She accepted without hesitation. Master Chiefs don't retire until the mission's done, she said quietly. As she left the debrief, she passed room 314 one more time. Caldwell was still teaching compressions, still pressing the dummy's plastic chest like he might bring something back to life. The man who tried to destroy her, living the smallest version of the life he thought he owned. She thought about the bet. $50 that she'd quit in 3 days. About the charts thrown at her feet. About the 12 doctors who told her to stop. She kept working anyway. She kept her hand steady. She kept her mouth shut until silence became power. Outside, Martinez the security guard waited by her car, standing at attention despite his civilian uniform. Master Chief. Permission to speak freely. Granted, Martinez. Thank you. For Kandahar. I never got to say it. She nodded once, got in her car. The radio played low. David was asleep in the passenger seat, his Naval Academy acceptance letter folded in his pocket. Somewhere, Caldwell taught CPR to strangers. Somewhere, for Marines rested easier because the people who sold them out were finally answering for it. Sarah drove toward her next assignment, hand steady on the wheel, the combat boot sitting in her back seat, no longer a weight, no longer a secret, just a reminder of what quiet strength could accomplish when the world stopped watching and a Master Chief did what needed to be done. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who didn't know your real value, drop a comment below. And if you believe the quietest people in the room might be holding everything together, subscribe for more stories about ordinary heroes carrying impossible missions. Like this video, and we'll see you next time.